My name is Mijal Schmidt, and I'm a psychoanalyst and a psychologist. I've been working for more than 50 years in the clinical side of things, and it's, yeah, certainly my passion. And it's been a while since I've been also working with plants, first of all, as an experiential or experimental point of view, and then yeah, one thing led to the other to the point where I'm today, which is working in integration with psychedelics as well. I have my private practice, and then I collaborate with other organizations, worldwide organizations. So basically, I work with people from all over the world, which is something that fills my heart very much. I get to know people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and yeah, different questions in life. So that's very interesting to me. I think that there are several definitions if we want to be very clear about it, but basically, I would say that integration of psychedelics deals with the aspects that came up in an intake, because the intake could be either in a ceremony or in another kind of setting, and the contents that come up from the intake and the experimentation with psychedelics, how are these contents related with the purpose of the person going into the experimentation? And it is a work of accommodating certain contents. In my perspective, is also about letting some of these contents just wear off. Some of them really come to the moment of the intake as some overdue contents. And so the distinction between these two great groups of contents, I would say, but there are more, that's a central part of integrating these contents. Of course, we take into account what the effects on the body these contents had, so as the impact that psychedelics also had on the body. And so we work in an integral way to understand what were the moves, either conscious or unconscious, that psychedelics allowed us to see or to encounter. I would say that's an integration. So for me, the purpose is very important, because that people know their purpose before, that they're clear about it, because the outcome of the session will determine the way in which the integration occurs. So the objective, of course, an objective are two different things, right? But the objective would be to try to get clear about how this purpose is linked with the outcome. Although I'm always stressing out that expectations about outcomes are not necessarily useful during or before the intake, because we go into the session probably with a lot of ideas in our minds about what we would like the session to be, and we actually see that some of the things that we thought we would find, we don't, but rather we find other things that we weren't expecting. So this flexibility is important also in the process, and also for understanding that my purpose might change along the session, and to be open. So it involves a lot of flexibility about the content, about the purpose, and about the outcome. And I would say that the final objective would be to have elements that allow me to understand better certain things, also to process certain things that might have been stuck for a while. But there's also the nuance of things in sessions. And so to be able to take those contents further on new explorations, either in psychotherapy or in other sessions, it's also part of the integration process. I do think it's important, particularly because of the times that we're living right now, because there are so many offerings. Not all of the offerings are structured, and sometimes this lack of structure doesn't allow people to actually go through the experience in a way where they can understand what happened. And some people just get stuck in the process without being able to make sense of what happened. So I wouldn't say that integration is always necessary, because sometimes during the intake, the integration happens with certain contents. And yet, to review what came up in an integration session, I would consider is part of the same process of experimenting with psychedelics. They're not separated things. I just think that they're part of a continuum. And integration allows us to be aware of things that we might have not seen during the session, or that we might have lost because of somehow the paraphernalia of the whole process of the intake. So we might have lost certain things in the way, and integration allows us to come back to these and use them. People who are just getting to know psychedelics benefit a lot, because it's a good guide. It's an interesting perspective to have in mind to navigate the work with psychedelics. But I found it very useful for people with a lot of experience also, that might have either had an overload during the intake and or heavy contents that might have gotten stuck somewhere in the intake. Successful is a strange word, big word, but I would say that aha moments are important to for the person to say or to realize that content fell into its place. And also for people who have been suffering from different ailments, of course, the yielding of these ailments or the symptoms, that would mean success. So if someone goes into a ceremony or a session and they feel less anxious or less depressed, or they got more clarity about something, or they figure out anything that they were after, even not even, seek for, but found, I would say that's success. Yeah, as I said, some of the symptoms, which I would like some of the most common ones would be feelings of anxiety or depression. So when these subdues, then I would say that people find other ways to relate to the world and others. So relationships begin to change in different ways, and relationships from the person to other things or aspects of their lives. So people who get it after a session would be improved sleep, or they find ways in which to eat healthier, or to even come out from certain inhibitions, which I consider a very interesting aspect of it, because that means that a great part of repressed contents were passed, were, yeah, let go of. And so someone is then lighter, more able to think, to read, to understand, to study, to dance, to love. So there are several things that might feel clearer, lighter, and even it might occur that some heavy things that people go through on a daily basis seem to be easier to tackle. I think that there are different perspectives on that. Some of the work of integrating is done in a few sessions or in less sessions, because the focus is on specific aspects or specific elements that came up during the session. And so it's more focused and it deals with particular elements. Now, a psychotherapy deals with more long-term work. Probably if we find that there are contents that have triggered past contents or past stories in that person, then that would need more time to unfold. And therefore, a psychotherapy which considers more time would be needed and preferred. Sure. I want to include one aspect of integration that I consider is part of the whole process, which is preparation. And so for me, preparation is just as important as the session itself and the integration. Why? The purpose is very important because it's a guide in itself for the whole session, and it also guides the process of integrating the contents that are related to the purpose. In this first part, preparation, I always talk about establishing our stones, which are coordinates for the experience. And these stones, to me, are elements that we can hold on to during the session, so that if we want to wander around with other contents that may occur, well, that's perfectly fine. That happens a lot of the times. However, sometimes for some people, having their stones set allows them to wander around, but then come back to what they want to focus on specifically. I would say that there are different kinds of decisions when it comes to how do I navigate the session of psychedelics. So people might want to just go freely, and others are particularly trying to work on something specific. So these stones are important for that. In that regard, a guide would ideally accompany the first stage, the preparation, the intake, and the integration itself. So a guide can help to abstract in these stones or in these notions the story or the purpose of someone. The purpose of someone might be super huge, or it could be super wide. The narrowing of these elements is also important, so that we don't just go into the session all scattered. And these sometimes is difficult for oneself to do it on its own. So sometimes the fact that there is someone external to us listening to these helps a lot to actually narrow these purpose. Therefore, the process will be also narrow, and the integration can also work, particularly in these aspects that were touched on. I think that's a great question, because how do you know the person that you're going to work with from a picture, right? Or from a description? Descriptions sometimes are limited to what someone can actually do. I would say that a first encounter is needed, a first meeting, so that you get to see how you feel heard, how you feel the guide is actually tackling on the things that are important to you, how well the guide is understanding what you want to do, or how well it allows you to actually focus on the things that you're looking for. And so this first understanding of how the guide works, how when you tell them what your purpose is or what you want from the session, what you get back from that is important. If you feel that there's rapport, or that there is this nice combination of characters, and also if this is a person that you feel comfortable with. Sometimes there are people that might not be as at first sight happy or super joyful or whatever, but I wouldn't go with that. I would go with actually knowing that more than the shape of it, more than the shiny things of, or shiny ways in which someone can present itself, I would pay attention in the way in which I feel heard. I feel that the person understands where I'm going. Some of the experience is also very important. I also consider clinical aspects to be there, so someone also can navigate in different ways with the contents. Circles have always been places where the combination of personalities is very helpful. It can also help people when they have not gone through a process like this, or that are struggling with the integration, or that they don't feel very confident on talking about themselves or talking about what their things are. The group allows to dilute a little bit that anxiety, but it also helps to see different ways in which people actually work with these contents, or work with their own situations, their own anxiety, their own depression. And sometimes this mirroring is very fruitful. It allows people to also come out of their inhibitions. And I think that a lot of people feel very accompanied with more people when they see that others do share the same aspects that they probably feel ashamed of, or that they have had a hard time going through. So community is important for that. I like to work with a psychodynamic perspective, because it allows to go deeper into causes. And when we work with causes, that helps us untangle difficult things that have been there. It helps us go through things that might have already said for a long time, that we become blind to them. I like the length of time, like not having a constraint of time, because then there's no rush. Then we can navigate the contents from the psychedelics at the same time that the contents of our lives, and then we can go here and there and come back and just make this a playful work as well, and something fluid that will allow you to explore things that you might sometimes think that are just minor things. And when you go through these minor things, it happens that you see that probably they weren't as minor as you thought. So some of these things that we get accustomed to, either because of culture, either because of education, either because we're told that we should move on, we have probably just allowed them to sit permanently. And when we have the time and the listening for this, then we see them differently. We catch things that we didn't know were there. That's on one hand. As I work with the psychedelic perspective, then we work with the unconscious as well. And a lot of the elements that also happen during the intake have to do with unconscious processes. And since unconscious processes are a main part of our lives, daily lives, then I consider that working with this perspective allows us to actually take the teachings from the session with psychedelics in a more fluid, in a more organic way to daily life. Sometimes this is not very well integrated, and then some people think that what I went through during the psychedelic intake has nothing to do with my life, or I don't know how to integrate it into my life. And so with this approach, I think that the bridging of these two different positions help us do something about the contents that might be cryptic sometimes, to actually download them and put them at play on a daily basis.